Hi, this is a quick walkthrough of troubleshooting issues in your virtualized ESX environments. So on this dashboard we can see that there are currently 3 alerts. They're all actually the same alert reflected in different ways. We've got an alert on a specific data store on an ESX host, and that's also showing up on a host alert for that ESX host, and it's being monitored from the vCenter server as well. So we can look at the vCenter server and drill in on that. Okay, so we can see that this vCenter server is monitoring 2 ESX hosts, one of which is an alert and one of which is not. And here we can see the details of the alert, that one of the ESX hosts now has 36 milliseconds of write latency. Looking at the ESX host that's not in alert, we can see disk latency is around 5 milliseconds. So that's good, that's as it should be. Looking at the one that is in alert, for comparison, we can see the write latency is up around 50 milliseconds. That's what triggered the alert. So let's drill in on how to resolve this issue. This is a very common kind of issue where you have resource contention among the different virtual machines on an ESX host. So let's look at this specific ESX host that's in concern. Okay, so we have only one data store on this particular ESX host, and it's not doing a huge amount of operations, but obviously it's enough to trigger the latency alert. So this is a very common issue where you have resource contention among the virtual machines on a host that are overloading some of the resources. Those resources are usually disk, which will give you disk latency, or memory or CPU. We have top 10 graphs which are automatically created based on all the virtual machines on that ESX host. So if you were looking at a CPU contention issue, you have 2 things that can dive into. You have the machines consuming the CPU, and you have the number of machines that are in CPU ready state, which means they want to run on the CPU, but the CPU is not available. Sometimes they're the same machines, sometimes they're not. In this case, what we have though is disk latency. So we can see, we want to look at the virtual machines that are consuming disk IOs. So we can immediately see on the top 10 graph that the virtual machine called VNetApp host is the one that's doing all the disk operations on this host. And if we drill down into the virtual machine itself, it's doing quite a few disk writes at a fairly steady state. That's what's causing the overload. None of the other virtual machines we can see in the top 10 graph, none of the other virtual machines are doing much disk IOs at all. So now we've immediately identified what virtual machine is causing the issue, and this is one of the other essential elements of having a unified monitoring system. We can now check out its details. So in this case it happens to be a virtual NetApp system. If it was a real NetApp, it would probably be hosting the data store rather than running on the data store. And we can see it's doing, roughly 200 operations per second. These are all the writes, and you can immediately see, use top 10 volumes on the aggregate, that the write operations are coming from the volume called QA Server 1. So we can look at that QA Server 1 volume and see, yes, there's the consistent writes. And we can now also, of course, look at the specific QA machine that's causing the load and check out its disk operations. And here we see, again, we have the top 10 view of the physical disks on this machine, and we can see, DM0, which is a logical volume manager volume, is doing all the load. And we can check the Tomcat performance and see how that's being affected. So our average processing time is 5 milliseconds. That's still pretty good. But we now know that the load on the ESX host is from this QA machine that's sending its disk operations to a virtualized NetApp that happens to be on that ESX host, and that's disproportionately consuming the data store IO capacity. So now we have the options. We can either move that QA machine to a different virtual NetApp or a different data store somewhere else, move that virtual NetApp to a different ESX host, or increase the spindles on our ESX host, or add a different data store. Automatic top 10 machines very quickly help you drill down on these kind of resource contentions, no matter whether the resource is CPU, local disk, network disk operations, or memory usage.